Hey there, I'm Ryan Boehme, and you're tuning into So You Want to Teach Percussion. This video series is designed particularly for my current Percussion Methods students. Since they aren't able to have a typical Percussion Methods experience due to the current global pandemic, these videos are designed to give them a foundation of the technique outside of class time so that we have more time to play when we're together. But I also hope this video series can be helpful to any music educators out there. Today, we're talking about tambourine. Tambourine is one of my favorite instruments. There are so many aspects about tambourine playing that are easy for beginners, making it a very approachable instrument, but there are also some neat advanced techniques that can provide really unique sounds to the ensemble. In this video, we're going to go over all the basic elements of tambourine playing, and we'll also get into a few techniques that'll make your students see this instrument in a whole new way. Today we're going to look at playing position, playing technique, and extended techniques. So grab a tambourine, and let's get started. First, we're going to talk about playing position. Playing tambourine is very different from all the other instruments we've covered in this series so far. One hand's going to hold the tambourine, and the other hand is going to strike the tambourine. But before you pick up your tambourine, you got to make sure your setup is ready to go. You can see here that I have a trap stand, but what's that cord sticking out from under the towel? It's an ordinary heating pad. If your tambourine has an animal skin head, that head's going to absorb any humidity in the air, which is going to cause it to become looser, resulting in a drop of pitch. This instrument I'm using has a kangaroo skin head, and since I haven't put it on a heating pad in a while, the head is loose and the pitch is low. So I'm going to set my heating pad to its lowest setting and leave the tambourine there for a few minutes. Let's see how it sounds now. Much better. The pitch is higher and the head is tight and responsive, and if I'm playing at an outdoor performance where I might be worried about the tambourine head being affected, I can leave my heating pad on my trap stand the entire performance. Since it's under my towel, it's likely that nobody in the audience is going to notice. Trap stands are also nice because they give your students an option for quietly picking up and putting down the tambourine. Tambourines are very noisy instruments, so if your students aren't careful, they'll make a lot of undesired noise that will probably distract the audience. Instead, they can take advantage of the trap table, leaving the tambourine in a position where it can easily be picked up quietly, then placing it down quietly after playing, so that they don't have to hold the tambourine for an entire piece and potentially make any accidental noises. I've mostly seen percussionists hold the tambourine in their non-dominant hand, so that the dominant hand can be used for striking the head. With your holding hand, the thumb is going to rest on the head, and the remaining fingers will just wrap around the shell of the tambourine. For general tambourine playing, you'll want to hold the tambourine at a 45-degree angle. If I hold the tambourine vertically, the jingles are able to move freely, which results in a longer, lighter sound that isn't very characteristic of a general tambourine note. If I hold the instrument horizontally, gravity keeps the jingles from moving for too long, but it also causes the jingles to bounce up and down a few extra times with each note, which is also undesirable. The 45-degree angle is a happy medium of sustain without extra residual jingle sounds. Now we're going to talk about playing technique. With every other instrument in this series so far, we've used some kind of implement to play, usually a drumstick or some kind of mallet. But for tambourine, your implement is this thing right here. Like I already mentioned, for general playing, one hand's holding the tambourine and the other hand is striking it. We have several options with our striking hand. The general rule here is that I'm going to use more fingers to play loud and less fingers to play soft. With my tambourine at this 45-degree angle, I can just bend my wrists, which sends the fingertips down to make contact with the head. This wrist motion is exactly like this wrist motion that we use for snare drum. I'll start with single notes. In this clip, I'm not dampening the head. Some tambourine heads will be very resonant, especially if they've been sitting on a heating pad. The primary sounds we want to hear are the initial articulation and the resulting sound of the jingles. So typically, you'll want some kind of dampening on the head, just to allow those two sounds to be most present. Some percussionists like to add moleskin or felt to the underside of the head as a dampening mechanism. Personally, I like to place 1 or 2 fingertips on the underside of the head. With most tambourines, I find that this helps my grip feel a little bit more comfortable. If your students don't like that method, however, you can use felt or moleskin instead. So now I'm playing with the head dampened. You get less resonance from the head, and the focus of the sound is more on the articulation from the hand and the resulting jingle sounds, which is exactly what we're looking for with general tambourine playing. Just like the heads on other membranophones, a tambourine head is most articulate in the center and it's most resonant at the edges. In addition, since there are jingles in the shell, you'll be more likely to activate jingles as you get further from the center of the head. For soft playing, I'll typically want to stay near the edge of the head, playing right over a set of jingles so that I can acquire a jingle-focused sound. In this clip, I'm only using one finger to play, which allows me to play more softly. For playing loud passages, however, I can play just off-center with all of my fingertips. In this clip, I'm also experimenting with a closed finger position versus an open finger position. So the closed finger position provides a more focused attack, and the open position provides a more open sound, activating the jingles a bit more. Neither of these articulations are wrong. Have your students try both and find what's most comfortable for them. For isolated notes that need a little extra pop and articulation, your students might use a balled up fist, where they're going to hit the tambourine head with the flat part of their fingers and the bottom of their palm. You don't need to use a lot of force here, but with just enough force, you can get a big front to the note. Your students can also use a flat hand for this, where the palm strikes the head. Either way, they won't need to use this technique often. Only in specific situations where you, the director, want one or a few isolated notes to be extra present. Okay, enough single notes. Now it's time to talk about rolls. This is a very characteristic technique for tambourine, so composers write them very often. But getting the shake roll down can take a lot of practice, so let's break it down. In this clip, I'm demonstrating the shake roll technique in slow motion. My rotation is very exaggerated at this slow tempo, but this is a great starting point if your students have never played shake rolls. All it takes is a simple rotation of the wrist. Once your students are comfortable with this at a slow speed, they can gradually speed up the technique, decreasing the amount of rotation as they get faster. The end goal is this, where the tambourine doesn't visibly rotate too much side to side. I'm basically just rotating enough to keep the jingles constantly moving. That creates a nice, sustained sound, rather than hearing each rotation like we heard at the slower tempo. So this is the first instance where we're really getting the holding hand involved. Shake rolls can be tricky to grasp at first, especially since your non-dominant hand is the one that's playing them. For this reason, some percussionists might choose to hold the instrument in their dominant hand instead, so that their non-dominant hand is used to play all the single notes. Your students can mess around with this and see which one works best for them, but you can't just use one hand for single notes and rolls. Once you start passing the tambourine between the hands, that's when you start getting a lot of unintentional sounds. And even if your students figure out some ridiculous method to do this quietly, I promise there's going to be a day when they have a tambourine part where they don't have time to switch between hands for single notes and rolls. Aside from the shake roll, we also need to give each roll a clear attack and release. Our goal here is to have the roll immediately follow the attack, and to have the release immediately follow the roll, without too much space on either side of the roll. Notice in this clip that there's an attack, a pause, and then the roll. We want to avoid that pause. In order to make that happen, I usually think about rotating the bottom of the tambourine into my striking hand. And I want to stop rolling right when I play the release stroke, not any sooner. You may also notice that the tambourine is more vertical in the roll position. That's because this is a case where we do want to allow the jingles to move more freely, since that's going to help us do a little less work ourselves to keep the sustained sound. You can kind of roll at the 45-degree angle, but it's much harder to keep the sound even, and gravity is working against you here. If your students are struggling with the shake roll, they can try an assisted shake roll. For this technique, the fingers on your striking hand are going to flop like this. Keeping the holding hand relaxed, my floppy fingers are just going to move the tambourine the same way it moves for a regular shake roll. In this clip, I'll play some assisted shake rolls. These should sound very much like our general shake roll technique, but it might be an easier technique for beginning percussionists. Now, the attack of the roll happens as a result of my hand making contact with the head. Then, at the end of the roll, I'll quickly take my hand off the head so that I can use it to play the release. Assisted shake rolls are also really useful for playing crescendo rolls. I can start by holding the tambourine low and beginning the roll low and soft, where much of the sound is going to be absorbed by the instrumentalists in front of me. Then, to increase volume, I'll engage the dominant hand more while raising the tambourine. This makes for a very successful crescendo effect when done correctly.
Mr. Boehme, what am I supposed to do with this?
Well, playing soft shake rolls is hard, so your students might want to try finger rolls. All I'm doing for this is keeping my middle finger mostly firm and putting my thumb right on this line where the knuckle is. Then I just push a little into the head and forward, which results in my thumb bouncing very quickly on the head. Here it is a little bit slower. Here's what a finger roll sounds like at a louder dynamic. Notice the path of my finger. I'm staying close to the edge of the head, which means I have the best chance of activating the jingles. You don't have to worry about adding an attack to these rolls, since it's easier to make a defined attack with finger rolls. But you want to keep the sound as smooth as possible, with no gaps in sound or movement from the finger, and you want to play a release to clearly define where the roll ends. For louder releases, I like to use my wrist. At the end of the roll, I'll just kick my wrist into the instrument, providing a nice articulation to end the roll. For a softer release, I can instead just use another finger. As I mentioned before with single notes, you generally want to use less fingers to achieve softer sounds. The learning curve for finger rolls can be steep for some students. Rather than using the middle finger, they might try the index finger or maybe even the thumb. These are all common choices for this technique. If your student's skin is on the drier side, you can get some beeswax and lightly apply it along the finger roll path. Even with a tiny amount of beeswax, you can add a lot more friction, which makes it a lot easier for your students to play finger rolls. Finally, we're going to talk about extended techniques. Composers have definitely stretched the limits of the tambourine. Even with the standard techniques we've already covered, there are still going to be some passages that aren't going to be easy to perform, but percussionists have adapted, and as a result, many extended techniques have found their way into the tambourine mainstream. First, there's the knee-hand technique. This is really useful for playing passages that are loud and fast. For this technique, you'll prop your foot on something short. I like to use the bottom of a short snare drum stand, but you might also try a chair or a small stepping stool. I'll demonstrate in slow motion. In this clip, I have the tambourine head facing my knee. I'm going to lock the wrist and initiate the forearm to send the tambourine down into my knee. And then I'll move the tambourine back up so that I can hit the underside of the head with my striking hand. The goal here is for my knee articulation and my hand articulation to match, so that each note has the exact same sound quality. Your students can experiment with the shape of the striking hand to better match the sound from the knee. Some students might prefer this, where the head of the tambourine is facing up. For this method, instead of the head making contact with my knee, the shell is going to make contact right above the knee on my thigh. Again, the goal is for each note to have the same sound quality, no matter which part of your body is initiating the note. Students can experiment with both of these methods and determine which one is more successful for them. Here's a passage where I might use this technique. The rhythm here is likely too fast to play evenly with one hand. With 2 points of articulation, however, the rhythm is much easier to achieve. Remember, you'll want to lock the wrist of your holding hand, initiating the forearm to move the tambourine up and down. It's tempting to use the wrist here, but that would cause a lot of extra motion in the jingles, which can overwhelm the sound of the articulation. Think about moving the tambourine as vertically as possible for this technique. If you're playing with the head facing downward and you have to play a roll, you can use what's called the special sauce technique, which is basically an assisted shake roll. The main differences here are that the tambourine is horizontal and that you're going to release the roll with your knee. But the knee-hand technique isn't going to be very friendly for soft playing. For softer passages, your students might try the gut technique. Here, the tambourine is tucked under my stomach, which holds it in place and frees up both of my hands so that I can play quick passages. You can play like this, or you can add the palm on the head to dampen the head more, allowing the sound to be even softer. Like I mentioned before, you'll be most successful at softer dynamics if you aim directly above jingles. Finger rolls work very nicely when using the gut technique. And since both of your hands are free, you can use one hand to play the finger roll and the other hand to play the release, like this. Once you get the hang of these techniques, they're tons of fun to use, and they'll give your students even more options to consider in their tambourine parts. I hope this video has helped you gain a better understanding of tambourine. It's a very friendly instrument, and it makes use of a lot of unique and interesting techniques. That's it for now. I'm Ryan Boehme, and thanks for tuning in to So You Want to Teach Percussion.